What is up, everybody? So excited to be here for our July meetup. We're doing these things virtual, which is okay. So I feel like we've still got some good content out there, and we're just kicking it. So tonight we're going to be talking a little bit about just some case studies, all the different types of deals that you can wholesale. So I know a lot of times it's an easy kind of do just a vacant single family, but we're going to talk about all different kinds of properties that you can wholesale, different options out there. We got 8 different case studies that we're going to kind of roll through tonight and talk about what kind of happened with us. And then we can kind of just talk about, the kind of the good, the bad, the ugly, the unpredictable, anything that could happen to some of these types of deals as well. So that's what we're going to take a look at tonight. So I do want to give a shout out to Cyria, as we are a subgroup of Cyria. So definitely hit up Cyria on all of their social media outlets, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, all those. And definitely see what all they have going on. So an amazing group with Cyria. So really excited to be a part of what they're doing and growing along with them. So thank you for tuning in tonight. So we are the Wholesaling Made Simple Meetup, the Simple Wholesaling team. The Simple team is what we like to be called. So my name is Brian. I'm the CEO of the Simple Brands. And we're just coming at you live talking about these case studies, all the different types of deals that we can wholesale. I do want to go around the horn and kind of talk to you guys, give you a chance to introduce yourselves, and then also share with them kind of what you can do if they're looking for help in a certain area of their business, how you can help them. So with me, if you need any connections, with anybody here in Indy or even nationally, I'm a pretty good person that you can reach out to. Let me know we help with your business as far as operations. I can help out with that as well. So really anything operations, systems, processes, and connections. I'm who you want to reach out to on our team for that. Ronnie, how about yourself, man?
Well, my name is Ronnie, and the way I can help you is you have a deal that you're looking to sell, having trouble moving it, the seller's giving you all types of issues, tenant got problems, give me a call so we can problem solve together because I can buy your deal. Yep, and you can hit me up at offers@simplequarters.com, and then I'll get right back to you. So, Randy, how about you?
Thank you, Ronnie. So I'm Randy. I just do all the sales here on our team, selling all the properties, working with our buyers list. So if anyone just needs help, generally people reaching out to me just want to know the best way to market a property or help me building their buyers list or just talking to buyers in general, like what information they want, how they can provide value to them. That's really what I do here for our team. So I'd be willing to help with that. And then also, I'm open to answering any just general questions about wholesaling. I've kind of done it all as a traditional wholesaler. So I'm not just limited to advice on dispositions. I can help you if you weren't trying to get started out, things like that. So ask away. And I'm Randy@simplewholesaling.com is the best email for me. Or you can find me on Facebook and shoot me a message. So Brett.
Yeah, thanks, Randy. Hey, I'm Brett Snodgrass, and I am the owner of the Simple Wholesaling Simple team. And I've been doing this for a long time, so I've kind of done every role, and I kind of know what you guys are getting into, what you guys are, talking to sellers, talking to buyers, and things like that. But probably my expertise, I'm kind of like on the senior tour right now. If you're playing golf, like Randy, I'm on the Jack Nicklaus on the senior tour. But I probably can help you most with number one, if you're looking to build a team and you're looking to maybe get out of your business. I'm probably at that point right now where you're looking to build your team so you can have some more freedom, so you can do some things that you're really passionate about, spend more time with your family. And so I'm right there at that point, and I could love to help you find that and what you're looking for and help you with that journey. So you can reach out to me at Brett, BRETT, at simplewholesaling.com. Back to you, Brian.
Awesome. Thanks for that. Good segue there. Way to turn it over there. You're like a newscaster, Brett. Appreciate it, man. And with the weather report for tonight. So thanks a lot. So we are basically, like I said, we're going to roll through some different case studies of 8 different types of properties other than just a regular single family vacant property that we have wholesaled over the last, year. So we're going to kind of roll through. I'll kind of give you the numbers and kind of what happened with them and things like that. But then I really want to kind of get into, hey, here are some things that you need to consider when you're doing this, or if you haven't thought about this before, here's how you can make this work for you. So there's 8 different scenarios that we're going to kind of talk about tonight. Is a vacant cookie cutter type property, an occupied property, a condo, land, a multifamily property, a subject to deal, a deal that has an escrow agreement in place, and then another wholesaler's deal. So how to work with another wholesaler to be able to sell their deals without daisy chaining or anything like that. So doing it correctly. So let's just kind of start off with being able to do a vacant cookie cutter. So kind of the next step, that kind of next transition. I think a lot of the easy properties, and I shouldn't say easy, the simple properties, the ones that you see most often are just those properties that are out there in a neighborhood that like downtown Indianapolis or somewhere like that, where it's usually a rental property that needs to be turned over. The owner's tired of it. They just need to turn it over. But you can also get out into the suburbs and do the vacant cookie cutters. Those are definitely possible. We've wholesaled multiple ones of those, especially to a lot of people around Indianapolis, down in whether it's Greenwood or even up into Carmel, Brownsburg, anywhere out like that. So we just did one in Noblesville. This one actually just closed last week, so I thought I would go ahead and share it. It was on Sunflower Drive out of Noblesville. This is one that we basically just got under contract for 118. And then we sold it for 129. So we had a simple, just an $11,000 profit on this one, but it's just kind of nice and simple for a cookie cutters, which was really good. But Ronnie, I want to kind of turn it over to you when you're dealing with, talking to motivated sellers. I will say this too, Ronnie I think he sold himself short of things that he can help people out with when it comes to dealing with property and stuff like that. Ronnie's like the master of talking to motivated sellers, being able to sit down with them, being able to have empathy for them and get in their emotions and stuff like that. So if you're having any help with that in your type of business, Ronnie's definitely the man to reach out to with that on our team. But when you're dealing with, a cookie cutter type property, it's a different clientele when you're instead of like a tired landlord or an out-of-state investor or something like that has a property they just want to get rid of. When you're working with a cookie cutter, it's usually a family that either needs to either upsize or downsize, one of those two things. And that's what you're kind of dealing with there. So what's some advice you have for people when they're going out there and talking to, a motivated seller that has a cookie cutter type property?
Gotcha. So one of the things you have to be aware of is that, if you have a cookie cutter, that's a property that everybody usually wants. So, and it's about if the seller discovers if that's something that they have, because they have a hot commodity. One of the things you have to be aware of is just, listening to their situation, but then also being able to ask the right questions about it. I recently had a cookie cutter that I actually might lose on because, the seller figured out, wait a minute, maybe I have something here, and that's fine too. It's going to work out for this situation, but you just have to, continue to look and listen, and then just ask the right questions. Why are you selling this property? What are the options that you have, in selling it? Am I your best option? You have to really kind of consider, all of those things when talking with those sellers, because these people are usually somewhat kind of aware of what's going on in their neighborhood. They kind of talk with their neighbors and things like that. So, it's always fun. Sometimes even a little bit easier kind of talking with cookie cutter sellers, just because they're a little bit more aware of what's going on. But, I just say, just be yourself, always listen, and just be ready for anything that can happen.
Yeah. I think one of the misconceptions that a lot of people have when it comes to dealing with a cookie cutter type property or something like that, because they're usually higher value. And a lot of people think, oh, the higher the value, the more of a spread I'm able to put on there, or the more the margin may be able to do. So, Brett, when you hear people talking about that, or thinking like, oh, okay, I'm going to get this, $100,000 property or $200,000 property under contract, I should be able to mark it up $50,000. Is that how do you feel about that when people say that, or that's definitely not the case, and we know that. So, and you know that from experience and things. So, what do you say about that?
Yeah, I mean, we've gotten into a lot of deals that it looks really pretty. The house is beautiful. It's a $200,000 house. But I will tell you, the bigger the house, the more expensive the house. And if we do take them down, the more expensive it is to hold on to that house, the more expensive the closing costs are, the more expensive the commission is to the agent, the more expensive insurance is, and if you're getting a loan on it. So everything's more expensive with bigger houses too. And you actually take out some of your buyers, right? So if you buy a more expensive house, a lot of the investors out there, they want an $80,000 house or a $100,000 house. So they don't have the market for a $200,000 house. So you kind of eliminate some of your buyers as well. And I guess I'll relate it to cars. So I used to flip cars back in the day. That's how I got started. in investing and flipping things. And I used to buy $1,000 car and I would sell it for $2,000, doubled my money. And it was a great day. And then I remember I saw this $10,000 Saab, and I was like, oh, this would be so cool to own a Saab, and have like a Bose stereo system and all these different things. And I think I sold it for like $10,000. I didn't make any money. And I said, you know what? Just a more expensive car doesn't equal more profit. I think you can kind of relate it to the same type as the house. You know, the more expensive doesn't automatically mean more profit too. Plus, there's just a lot more risk, right? So when I talk to you guys and you throw a $200,000 house at me, I'm like, we got to at least sell this for 220 sometimes if we got, because like that's about breaking even sometimes for us. So I think you just got to be careful. It's not always that case. And yeah, so those are some of the tips that I have.
Yeah. So, and you talk about like kind of the, the more the risk or the more the money that's involved. When it comes to the buyer side, Randy, a lot of those buyers, they're going to want to, that's when they're going to want to have more in-depth inspections, inspection reports, just in general and stuff like that. So on the buyer side, when you're trying to wholesale that, cookie cutter type property, there's a lot more involved than some of the nice and easy rental properties that you have that are like maybe $50,000, correct?
Yeah. I mean, you kind of said it. So they're going to have more money invested. They're going to be more careful with that money. So you're more likely that buyer's going to have a more formal inspection. Maybe a couple walkthroughs, like a preliminary walkthrough before they make an offer, and then they'll have a formal walkthrough with their contractor. And they'll look for anything to, come back and adjust that price with you. But they're going to actually have an inspection more than likely. However, when you're working with a cookie cutter property like that, you kind of it's usually in a better area than inside the loop. And that's really what you're selling. You're selling the area, you're selling the, the appreciation value. And you're selling that, hey, you could use this. It's going to be a great rental all day long. And some of the highest rents in Indianapolis are in the suburbs. But also, most of the time, those cookie cutter properties, the layout is already kind of like to modern day standards. So you don't have to take down any walls. It's usually a cosmetic update throughout. So it's a quick and easy property for any investor. And that's really kind of like your value proposition, I guess, when selling those. And again, it's just because you get a property for $150,000 or $200,000, it doesn't mean your profit's going to be, or your assignment fee is going to be through the roof because it's a more expensive home. So.
Yeah. So we got a question here, just from one of the from one of the people that are watching. Just what type of motivation do cookie cutter houses have to sell? So honestly, it's a lot of the same stuff. I know one of the biggest ones is that they can't afford their mortgage anymore, that they fall behind in their mortgage. And you have your people that want to downsize if their kids have left to go, move somewhere else. A lot of those people can still retail. So there's not much motivation there on that side. But a lot of times it's because they can't afford their mortgage. Or they need to move out of town. Maybe they got a job offer and need to move out of town. And just need to move quickly.
Yeah, I mean, that is what's happening. Even the phone call I just got now, and think contextually about what's going on with people having, issues with COVID and job, things like that. They just can't afford their mortgage. I mean, I literally had somebody call me and said, hey, I just missed my first mortgage payment. I don't want to get any further behind. Can you just take over my mortgage? And so that's really what's kind of happening right now.
Yeah, and that's what we're going to see right now. I mean, we're going to go through this phase in the next few months of a forbearance, where all these forbearances come due. What's going to happen in these properties and stuff like that. So it's a chance for investors and wholesalers to, help out people in dire situations in this case. So let's go ahead and move on to the next case study that we have for us, and it's just an occupied property. It's a lot of times I get asked this question of, hey, can you wholesale a property with a tenant in it? And the answer is yeah. Like we do it all the time. It happens all the time and stuff. So I kind of want to just roll through. I just pulled out a property that I can kind of talk about what we did, and then kind of the case of what happens on the back end of some of this stuff when you're dealing with the tenant and the leases and all that. So we got a property on Newton down in the Twin Air area here in Indianapolis. The rent was $650 a month, kind of typical for some of these areas around here. But we got that property under contract for $16,000. Just a landlord that was he was just tired. I think the tenant next day, he was kind of sporadic, wasn't really paying all the time, stuff like that, and he was just kind of tired of it and wanted to get rid of it. So we got it under contract for $16,000, and we sold it for $26,000 with the tenant in there, with the lease in place, all that stuff. So we made it take a quick $10,000 profit. But really, what I want to get into is when you're dealing with picking up a property that has a tenant in it. a lease in place and stuff like that. So Randy and Ronnie, I'll kind of go to each of you guys with this stuff and then being able to sell that as well. So Ronnie, when you're dealing with that occupied property that has a tenant in place, what are some things, types of questions you need to ask, and things you need to consider when you're getting that property under contract?
You want to know the key things. Number one, what is it rented for? And then also verify it, because, you might, the seller might tell you one thing, and then you go and talk to the tenant. The tenant's like, no, I only pay $402 a month. And, I'm on a 6-year lease. So, you got to have to, kind of know what's going on. The other thing that I would really encourage you, because this is about downstream effects, is if you have a seller that doesn't want you to talk with the tenant, that is a red flag. You want to kind of be aware of that, and let the tenant, let the seller know, like, hey, we need to know this information. We need to verify the lease. We need to know what's going on. And then even when you do talk to that tenant, almost talk with the tenant like, he's a motivated seller, to ask them exactly what's going on. What have they noticed? Because, they can verify other information or give other things that's going to, help on the front end. So when you're getting ready to offload this property, you have more information, more context of what's going on, both from the seller and from the person that's actually living there as well. All that information is very important.
Yeah, when you're dealing with an occupied property in a wholesale situation, usually it's for two reasons. One, it's a bad property, or two, it's a bad tenant. It's
right.
One or the other, sometimes both.
Right.
And really what you need to do is figure out what that is to be able to get it under contract for the right price, and then be able to inform your investor on the opposite side of what's really going on. So Randy, how do you handle some of those conversations when you're dealing with a property that has that tenant in place and the buyer's really has a lot of questions, not necessarily about the property, but also about the tenant?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, first questions they're always going to ask you is, do you have a copy of the lease? So first thing, you want to make sure you have a copy of that lease. Even if you don't, you at least want to know directly from the owner and the tenant. You want to just ask the details so you can kind of just create your kind of one sheet to give to the buyer, like, hey, this is how much they're paying. They've either never been late or they've been late the past couple months, and their lease date is up, whatever date it is, or if they're on a month-to-month. So that's going to be important to know for your buyer. And then second thing, they're going to want to know the condition. And typically it's harder to get inside some of the occupied properties because you're not dealing with the owner who's like, yeah, come see my house. You have to go through maybe one or two people to get to the tenant. And then they have to be okay with a day and time for you to come by and take a look at the property. So when you're getting that property under contract, it's really good to get inside and get as much information and photos as possible, and kind of put a package together to send to your buyers. So basically, if someone's looking for a property like that, they can see the photos and even a video if you do that and say, yeah, I'm pretty sure I want to move forward with this. Let's get under PA, and then I'll find a time to get my contractor in. The more information, the better, so they don't have to enter the property and disturb the tenant. I know we sometimes offer like gift cards, $25 gift cards to tenants, just to say, hey, can we get in tomorrow? I'll give you a $25 Visa gift card, whatever it is. And that typically that works, and you can get in quicker like that. But yeah, so access is huge. But like you took the words out of my mouth. It's they're selling the house because it's a tenant problem or a property problem. So marketing an occupied property, if they're getting $650 a month and the market rent is $800, don't market it like, hey, like this is a cash flowing property, $650 a month, great tenant, because it's not. That's not the case. You're gonna want to work with the buyer, put a plan in place, get the tenant out, do some repairs, and up that rent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I've got a couple questions coming in here, Sue. Somebody wants to know if we double close or assign our contracts. We double close on all of our stuff. There's every now and then we'll do an assignment if we have a buyer like specifically lined up. For the most part, we double close. And honestly, in a lot of these situations, when it comes with an occupied property, we actually buy it and hold it for a little while to stabilize the tenant or get the property under control a little bit better, make sure we know what's going on. That way we can figure out kind of what's going on the back end. So if you're just typically wholesaling to be quick, we have private money that we're able to use, or private investors we're able to use, be able to buy on these properties and hold them for a little bit to stabilize it. If you're not in that situation, it might be a good way to maybe partner with somebody who is able to maybe get those properties under contract and buy it, stabilize it, and then help sell it on the back end is always kind of a good option too when you're dealing with occupied properries. Another question is just, do you guys have to go through the eviction process with a tenant, or how do you handle a tenant? So it's a little bit of both. Sometimes there is an eviction that's needed. Sometimes it literally is just like, hey, I don't want to deal with this property anymore. I can't take care of it. Is it the seller saying, hey, I can't take care of the property. I can't keep up with the maintenance of what's going on here and stuff like that. And the tenant's paying. And sometimes that's the case, and that's okay. In that case, you don't have to evict the tenant. Everything's good. And it really is just passing the lease on from one buyer or from the seller to the buyer. In that case, it's a pretty easy process. There are some cases, like I said, sometimes we get it or we buy it so we can stabilize it. In that case, we do some evictions. I think at one point we actually had 6 evictions going on at one time, just because it just when it rains, it storms, I guess, is kind of that thing, and it just happened. So we have an eviction that's going on right now that's lasted almost a year. Just going through the court system of things, especially with COVID and everything right now. So sometimes that is the solution, that the eviction has to happen, but it's a better product for your end buyer. Like I said, if you're not in a position where you can buy it, hold it, and stabilize it yourself, maybe partner with somebody that can, or look for somebody that's looking to get properties like that, because a lot of people are. That's how they can get properties for the right price. So that's always a possibility as well. So, all right, just kind of moving on to the next case study we have here is it's a different type of language, a different type of deal that you can do, but you can definitely wholesale land as well. So you can do lots, you can do plots of land, acres of land, any of those types of things. We did one down in Nashville, Indiana, and this is actually a kind of a special one too, because it was a JV deal. A wholesaler brought this deal to us and said, hey, I have this, I believe it was 20 acres, something like that, down in Nashville, Indiana, that they basically wanted us to just partner with them, be able to help them find a buyer, because our buyers list is a little bit more extensive than what they had. So he got it under property for $13,000. He partners with us. We ended up selling that property for $27,000. So we ended up splitting that deal, just the profits at the end, 50-50. So we each got $7,000. So all in all, it was a pretty good deal. But I will say 100% of when you're dealing with the land, it's a completely different conversation, completely different scenario. I think Randy and I both realized that as we've had little plots of land, or different, people we've tried to wholesale some land. It's a different scenario. Yeah. Brett, I'm going to kind of turn this one over to you, as this is kind of how you got started. You started buying land down in southern Indiana. You've sold lots. You've sold, acres of land. You sold land for timber. You've kind of done a little bit of everything with this. So when you're dealing with, selling land or wholesaling land, what are some things you have to consider with that?
Yeah, thanks. So yeah, I've sold quite a bit of pieces of land. It's kind of how I got started in real estate. Initially, I was actually working with a timber company down in Bloomington, Indiana. And again, that's a lot different than selling lots. So we were buying 100 acres of woods, and the timber company would go in and harvest the large timber. And then they would make $100,000 off of that, and then they would sell the land and make money. And that was their business model. So that's kind of what I was used to. So I got into some land, and most of it was exactly like that. They were larger parcels, and 13 acres, I guess, is kind of a larger parcel, 20 acres to 100 acres. And what I really liked about selling larger pieces of land is because a lot of times they price it by the acre. My dad and I, one of our very first deals, we bought 126 acres of land down in southern Indiana. And we only sold that for like 300 or 400 acres, or 300 to 400 per acre more than what we bought it for. Well, if you think about it, 300 to 400 per acre doesn't sound like a lot of money. But when you take that times 126 acres, $300 to $400 per acre is a lot of money, right? So I think that's why I enjoy, because you can really, it doesn't look that much of a difference because they price it per acre. But yeah, the conversations are a lot different. You really got to know what you're doing, and it's a niche business. So for me, I would sell land to timber companies. That was a very niche business. So I would look for wooded pieces of land that had timber on it. Very niche. If you're looking at lots, right, you're going to want to look in areas of Indianapolis that people are building on. There's plenty of lots around Indianapolis, but there's some areas that there's no buildings going up in those areas, right? So you can just pick them up for nothing. So I think you just got to know what you're doing, and you just got to really be careful with land, because I heard this on a podcast one time that when a recession hits or the economy starts to go down, that land eats 3 meals a day, right? So it can literally eat your lunch, because no one is buying land, right? Because they don't need it if the economy tanks and goes through that. So I think you got to be careful with that. It's a very niche business, but I think a lot of people can do it. Another thing that we do is the seller financing land. Is a very, I've mentioned a couple of, I know a couple of guys, they buy lots for literally $100. You can buy a lot in Indianapolis for $100, and then they sell it for $2,500 on seller financing, right? Something like that. So that's another great way to build residual income on the seller financing.
Yeah, so awesome. We did have a comment on here, like, why would an eviction take a year? As I mentioned, the one that we have, for a whole lot of reasons. So, I mean, COVID being like the last, 4 or 5 months is why it's been extended, but there's been a whole lot of reasons. If you want to shoot me an email, I'd be more than happy to talk to you about it if you're worried about that for one of your things that's going on. But a whole lot of things. Part of it's a little bit on us, a little bit of not, progressing, not pushing too hard. But so that's a whole other story though on that. So let's move on to our next case study. So it's also, people ask us this one is can you wholesale a condo? You can definitely wholesale a condo. We've done a couple of them. We just did one actually last week. Condo, townhomes, all those types of things. So this one I pulled out was just from, a few months ago that we did. It was on Village Parkway over like the Eagle Creek area. We picked it up. We got under contract for $44,000. We sold it for $53,000. So it was just a $9,000 profit. Pretty kind of a nice and easy deal. I think the big thing, and Randy, I'll kind of lean on you for this one, is a kind of condo. It's a little bit more on kind of what the buyer really wants on the back end of it. Ronnie, if you have anything to contribute about like kind of talking to some people in this area, I'd appreciate that too. But I think the big thing with a condo is, and we kind of found out, is like, hey, can it be rented? I've seen people that they got a property or a condo under contract and they had trouble selling it because then all of a sudden they realized like, hey, this can't be, you can't do a rental in this area. Yeah. And that's kind of the case too when you're talking about cookie cutters and subdivisions. You have to worry about that as well. I've seen it a little bit more with condos. But Randy, when you have a condo, we have one under contract and we're looking to connect a buyer with that. What are some things that you need to consider, and just kind of talking to the buyers of how that conversation goes?
Yeah, like you said, the big one was you got to make sure that association approves their condos being as rentals. But there's also some that do, but then that association just will allow like up to 25% of all condos can be rented. So you got to make sure that they can have them there and that they're not at the max of what they allow. If there's no max, then you have to worry about it, because we've had one where there could not be rentals at all, and our buyer pool just got slashed by like 75%. But with this one, since they could have rentals there, that wasn't an issue. But when you're kind of marketing it to your buyer who doesn't mind condo rentals, you have to also include association fees. So for condos, there's a monthly fee to have that unit. So that's going to cut into your cash flow, monthly cash flow, and the buyer's going to take that into consideration and put that as part of their numbers. Then you just kind of want to make sure that it kind of just hits the boxes like any other traditional sale. But really, when it comes to condos, just the fees play a big part of it, and then just having it available to be a rental is a huge part. So I would research those items before putting that property under contract.
I'm surprised we haven't done a mistake Monday on that. Yes, we have got a property and not researched the condo.
That one that we had, I sent out as a rental, and then sure enough, the association was like, can't do it. I was like, all right, well, where's my owner occupant?
And that happens. So luckily, that's a great opportunity. So I see a lot of people that are downsizing from from the cookie cutters out in the suburbs and things like that, are moving to a lot of condos and things like that. So it's more of maybe a possibly like wholesale retail lead that works out really well for those condos as well. If if you're not in that position, you can partner with somebody else on that. So that's a great way to wholesale a condo as well. Let's move into kind of the next case study of let's talk about a multifamily. So we have not done like a huge 50 unit or anything like that, but we have done a couple smaller ones. So we did one, the one I pulled out of case study we were just kind of mentioned here. We're going to kind of talk about what happened with it. Was just a 10 unit. So it was a 10 unit. I believe maybe 6 or 7 of the units were occupied, and there were a couple of them that were vacant. But it was in the Warren Park area over on East Ridge. So when we're talking about a multifamily, you're definitely talking about a bigger price tag and things like that. A lot of things to consider. We talked about your buyers wanting to do inspections and a little bit more in-depth things. It's over the top with multifamilies. So I know this deal, we picked it up for $261,000. We sold it for like $287,000. So we ended up with a $26,000 profit. We thought we were going to get a lot more. It was a perfect scenario of like, hey, we might be able to make 40, 50 on this one. But then when it all came down to it, of everything that the buyer needs to consider and everything that they're looking at, because you really have to take in place of, number one, it's a longer period. So if you're getting a multifamily under contract, You don't want to go for like the 10-day or, 15-day contract or anything like that. You want to go for the 45, 60-day, 90-day contract, because your buyers are going to need time to go through everything that they need. They have to go through an appraisal process. We have to go through all of that, inspections, kind of the whole nine works. So, Brett, I'll ask you this one. Just when you're dealing with, a multifamily, we have that multiple things in place. So whether it's occupied or vacant, we kind of already talked about those things with leases. But the things you need to consider when you have, let's say, a 10 unit or 15 unit, something like that, and you're looking to wholesale, get that under contract and sell it to a buyer, what are some of the things that people need to consider with that?
Yeah. So I would say one mistake that I see a lot of people is they have multifamily where there's 6 units, 7 units, 8 units, and the utilities are always in question. Maybe it's a really big house and they split it into 9 units, which we've seen before. We had a house, remember, down in Greenwood, I think. They took a...
Let's not talk about that one. That's a whole mistake. That's a whole mistake week. So.
I mean, a lot of people they take a giant house that's like 5,000 square feet and they split it into units, but they don't split the utilities. So literally, you might be getting $3,500 in rent, but you pay all the utility. The owner pays all the utilities, and so you're really getting like $2,000 or $2,500 in rent. So that's one mistake that I see people doing is the utilities aren't split. So that's one thing I would really check on. So like this 10 unit, most of the time electric is split. If there's gas, that could be split, and then the owner pays the water. That's a typical deal. Another thing is just to consider is, so this 10 unit, for example, we talked about not owner occupied, but occupied properties. Well, if you think a single family home occupied is challenging, take a 10 unit that typically 7 or 8 units are occupied. Well, that becomes extremely challenging because, again, your buyer, they want to see the units. They want to do an inspection. Well, now you got to call 8 tenants and try to get them in and figure everything out. So it can be a hassle doing that and kind of logistics. And then, you really want to look at the maintenance, honestly. So you want to go through the multi-unit with a little bit more of a fine-tooth comb, is because it could get really expensive for the maintenance. So let's say a 10 unit needs a new roof. Well, a single family that needs a new roof, it might cost $5,000, something like that. Throw that out there. But a flat 10 unit, it might cost $30,000, right? So it just becomes a lot more expensive. There might be 10 water heaters. There might be, 10 sets of appliances. So everything just becomes more expensive with that. So I think, just maybe do an inspection. I think do a little bit of a deeper inspection on those multi-units. Yeah, those are some of the things that I got. And again, they're very attractive though. So your buyers, whenever you send them out like Randy, your buyer's like, oh my gosh, I got a 10 unit in Indianapolis.
Yep.
Great.
Yeah, you'll get blown up.
Right.
So Randy, let's talk about that on that side of it from the buyer standpoint, or from somebody that's trying to sell a multifamily, of where, we've had this conversation of like, you get a lot of people that are interested in this certain property a little bit more than a single family sometimes, a lot of times. So how do you deal with kind of managing the relationships with those buyers and weeding out the tire kickers, the people that are really interested, the people that have the money, the people that can close within a month or 45 days? How do you deal with kind of the stress that brings along with it?
Yeah, so this kind of plays into, we've talked about due diligence with a buyer. I mean, this is when it's key. So people are blowing you up left and right about a property or apartment deal that you have. They don't get in without proof of funds and without knowing that they can close on this in your time frame. 30 to 45 days is normal for a property like that, but you want to make sure that they're an actual buyer. They can show you proof of funds that they can close, and they kind of preliminary agree to your terms of the deal. Without those 3 things, I mean, they don't get in. I mean, they have to be vetted, because it takes a lot of time to, let alone just for a single family occupied property. But now if you've got 8 to 10 units, you got to coordinate with all those tenants in there to find a time that works for everyone, for that person to go see the property. So just making sure you're working with a real buyer is huge when it's coming to that.
Yeah. So Ron, let's kind of talk about, because you've kind of been in this position before of basically kind of working as, when you're working a deal, we already have it under contract, let's say, and then you're kind of working through just making sure the tenants are okay, making sure they don't need anything, or kind of just figuring out information about the property. So what are some tips you have for that on when you are basically kind of in that in-between phase where you have it under contract, Randy's trying to sell it, but then, you're trying to make sure like, oh, or, is this, what's going on with this tenant? Do we know what's going on? How do you handle some of that stuff, man?
You have to really nurture those relationships. It's really important to nurture all of those relationships. I remember a couple of tenants, their kids, just finding those, connecting points as you're doing the walkthroughs and things like that, seeing if they do need anything, checking in with them, because there were a couple of that actually that wanted to move out. So just being able to say, okay, well, that's good. But just being that point person in between that they can contact and know what's going on and just kind of communicate things. I mean, that is very key, being that information hub, and then also that ambassador, so they feel safety. They can kind of complain to you. If other stuff comes up, that's fine too. But you wouldn't want to position yourself as an ambassador for them and a servant to them, because you're also providing them service too. Because we don't know who's gonna buy it, but just letting them know that, hey, it's gonna be okay, everything's fine. But just if you have any questions, position yourself as an ambassador.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think it's something that a lot of people miss too, because when you are wholesaling a property, whether it's multifamily, single family, or whatever, and it's occupied, you're not only just wholesaling the property, you're wholesaling the tenant as well. So making sure that they feel comfortable with everything, they understand what's going on. I don't know how many times we get, where the seller's trying to sell an occupied property and be like, oh, well, you can't tell the tenant what's going on, but being able, that's a tough thing. It's a tough spot to be in. And when you have something like this where a 10 unit and somebody wants to move out, all of a sudden that changes for the investor. Does Randy's investor, do they want it? Are they going to get it vacant so it doesn't matter anyway? That actually helps them out. Or do they want to try to get it as occupied as possible because they want the cash flow right away? So that all of a sudden one tenant leaves in this situation, it could be a game changer for that buyer or that buyer that's on the opposite side. So being able to work that, it's not just get it under contract and we can sell it and not worry about what's going on with it. You got to kind of be, like Ronnie said, that ambassador, that mediator, that person that's making sure everything's going well in between all this stuff, whether it is a single family, multifamily, or anything that's going on. So, so another point that Ronnie's very good at that he can help you out with this kind of stuff. So, no, that's great, guys. So next one, let's kind of move on to, and this is I'll throw out as we just like kind of, man, Ronnie, your head might be getting a little big in this. I'm going to give you some more praise on this next one too. But when you're dealing with a subject to deal, so basically, in this case, a subject to deal is basically you're going to take over the property subject to the mortgage, meaning that you're going to just continue, you're going to take over the mortgage payments for that person and then being able to wholesale it after that. So being able to wholesale a subject to deal is kind of what we're talking about here. We just did one of these. It's been a few months ago now, but in the Pike area on Tybolt, Ronnie got under contract subject to the mortgage of $121,000. We ended up selling that property for $132,000. So we made an $11,000 profit on this one. But this is a tough conversation to have. Not necessarily telling them what's going on or that you can do this, because generally you can maybe offer a little bit more money, so they're happy about that. But the seller understanding everything that's involved in doing a subject to deal or agreeing to selling you the property subject to their mortgage. So Ronnie, when you're having these conversations with these sellers, being able to do that, what are some things that you really kind of make sure you have to hit home that they need to make sure they understand and that you're having those conversations with?
Bigger thing is that make sure that you understand what a subject to deal is. And also understanding the pros and the cons of that and being able to explain it to yourself, because you also have to make sure that the seller is very aware of the pros and the cons of that. When you're using the strategy, this is one that we sometimes use if we're maybe looking at maybe pushing our numbers, because maybe the seller is stuck on a particular number. And so, okay, well, if you want this, because I can't offer you this cash price, then I can give you more in your pocket, but I'm going to have to take over your mortgage. So I'm letting them know, like, look, we're going to make your mortgage payments, but I'll give you $10,000, since you're stuck on that. But I'm going to make your mortgage payments for you. I'm going to make it on time every time. You don't have to worry about that. And then, we'll just kind of just move forward. But then also too, the sellers ask the right question and say, well, what if you miss no mortgage payments? Because that comes up, and we let them know that, look, we're not going to miss a mortgage payment, but if there was something weird happen, then, they could come after you. And if you're buying the property subject to, you have to know that. Like, don't enter into a subject to agreement if you can't hold up your end of the bargain, because our whole point is to try to help the seller. And if we get into a situation where you can't do that, guess who we're hurting? The seller. So you want to make sure that you're very cognizant of that. But we were able to get this property under contract. The seller understood, at the signing of it, what was going on, and they were okay and comfortable with us making the mortgage payments because they were just going to go live with some family members, and they weren't looking to do anything else, so that's fine. The other thing you do have to think about is, when you're buying a property subject to, ask the seller, what is your exit strategy? Okay, you're getting out of this house, but what else are you going to do? Because sometimes sellers think that, they might want to try to go get another mortgage, and then what's going to show up in the credit report? That other mortgage is there too. So they won't be able to do that. So those are some things that you need to kind of talk through the seller with to make sure that they understand everything on the same page, and you're not getting, phone calls or hiccups down the road. But very, very important to make sure that you're aware of that information.
Yeah. So a couple things when you are getting a property, under contract for subject to, our number one thing, what we'd love to be able to do is sell that obviously for a cash price to where basically they're getting out from underneath their mortgage. So we can tell the seller, hey, this is possible. We never promise that because you never know what's going to happen. So Randy and Brett, I'm going to kind of talk to each of you, and so Randy, I know our goal is always to have that cash deal on the back end and being able to do that. And that's kind of cut and dry, and you can talk about that a little bit. Brett, I'll go to you first, because what you don't want to do, and we've done this before and kind of been almost burned on it a couple of times and had to kind of figure it out and problem solve around with it, is buying a project subject to and then selling it subject to as well. Can get in a little tricky and stuff like that. So you want to kind of talk about just things to be careful of there. And in these cases, we're double closing all these. So we're actually in charge of the mortgage, the mortgage payments and handling it that way. So you want to talk about like kind of maybe why you want to make sure you get a cash deal for it versus a subject to deal for it.
Yeah, definitely could talk about that. So yeah, our first option is to sell it cash. If someone pays cash for the property, the seller gets their mortgage paid off. They get what they want. We get what we want. We make some money, and that's the end of the deal. What we have ran into before is, and this is an attractive way, is say we're buying this property subject to, and then this buyer comes over and we say, hey, we bought this property subject to, and he says, well, I want to buy it subject to. And then you pass your interest, your subject to interest, onto the buyer. So now the buyer is the one that's responsible to pay that seller's mortgage. Well, you can get burnt with that because you lose absolute control over the situation. Because if that buyer doesn't pay the seller's mortgage, guess who the seller is upset at, which is reasonably so, because we signed a purchase agreement with them that we were going to have their mortgage being paid. So I wouldn't do that. So number one, I wouldn't pass your interest in subject to another buyer. There's other creative ways that you can do it, which we have done it with some seller financing, land contract for deed methods, which we have done before. And again, it's just keeping control of our situation, making sure at least we are paying that mortgage no matter what the buyer is doing. And the biggest thing is just keeping control.
Yeah, that way hopefully the buyer or the seller just gets paid off, their mortgage gets done and over with, and you get from that. So Randy, on your side, when you approach that and you're approaching buyers on that, it's a subject to deal. Do you put that in your mind? You're just like, nope, I'm trying for a cash deal, like 100%, and like not even consider that in your head? Or
yeah, for me it's a little different. It's never in my head, being 100% honest, just because we kind of sit in a different position where we are the sellers. If I was assigning that deal, then yeah, that would be in my head the whole time. It'd definitely be something that you'd want to let that buyer know that, it is on subject to terms, and just make them aware of that, because then they, like Brett said, they could be the one that said, hey, I want that set up as well. And that could be tricky working out, and also getting that seller to be okay with that as well. But yeah, for me personally, that's never an issue. I always go straight for the cash sale. I don't try to structure any type of creative thing unless it comes down to that point. And that's only happened to me once. Everything else we've done subject to I just sold cash.
Yeah. So we do have a question coming in here. Just in a sub-2 deal, does the seller get paid, or how does the seller get paid, or do they get paid even? And you can, they can or they can't. It kind of just depends on what you structure. And Ronnie, you can kind of take it. I'll kind of add a little bit, and then you can add to it if you need to. But basically, if you're doing a subject to deal, you can agree to basically, giving them the amount to take over their mortgage. But if you want to give them a little bit extra, so I believe in this case, we actually got their mortgages maybe $111,000, and then we gave them $10,000 just to base. So we took over their mortgage and then gave them $10,000, and that all just happened at closing, just like a general closing and things like that would. So, Ron, do you have anything to add to that, or kind of how that usually happens? Or
yeah, no, that's exactly right. Like the lady that called me Saturday, she said, "Hey, I just take over my mortgage." Like she didn't want anything else over. She just wanted her mortgage taken over, so she wasn't ask for any cash. But when we looked at the numbers, it made sense for us to try to give her $5,000 more than that, just with what's going on. So that's how that happens directly at closing. Just the difference between the mortgage payoff and what the offer is.
Yeah. So it all depends on kind of where you are with the property, how bad you want it, and kind of what their mortgage statement makes. Sometimes you can do a subject to, and then if the property is worth, $25,000 more, and you're okay with that, you can give the seller $25,000 at closing and walk away from it from there. It all depends on what your price wants to be, and if they really want it. Sometimes we do have sellers when we talk to this, usually it's usually they're paying off or taking it subject to their mortgage and then giving them a little bit just to help them out. Like maybe it's just a couple $1,000s or something. They always usually want a little something that we give them a closing just to help them move into their next place, or, put a down payment on their apartment, whatever it may be. They usually want a little something. Every now and then it's just for the amount. So, yeah. So with that, I want to kind of go to the next one then. So if we talk about, you can also work with other wholesalers to help wholesale their deals. Like I said, kind of that doesn't mean daisy chain. So if you see Randy put out a deal, that doesn't mean take his deal and put it out like yourselves, because that happens often. I see our deals sent to myself quite often and things. But so we're not talking about that. We're talking about kind of the legit way, the correct way to wholesale a deal. So I'm going to let Randy kind of talk about this a little bit more, and then I'm going to have Ronnie kind of dig this too, because Ronnie, we buy a lot of deals from other wholesalers because we are a legit buyer here in Indianapolis. So we're always looking for properties to buy from other wholesalers. So if you have a property under contract, you're having trouble selling it, make sure we're on your buyer's list. We want a chance at it, things like that. But when we're talking about this deal, kind of Randy working with another wholesaler, so this is actually a case, the one that I pulled out is a case where a wholesaler that we know, we have a relationship with, they basically helped us sell one of our properties. So in this case, this was on North Mount down over in Hawville. We had under contract for $25,000. And basically the wholesaler got under contract with us for $33,000. I don't know what he did on the back end, but when he sold it, we ended up making $8,000 profit. So Randy, you want to kind of go about maybe just kind of because you work with this all the time, and I think when you started too, we had these conversations, where I'd be like all the time, like, oh, I have a buyer for this, whatever. I'm like, is it a wholesaler? Is it like keeping the legitimacy of that? And you kind of realize right away that's a question you need to ask. Like, are they really buying it? Are they a wholesaler? What are they trying to do with it? And then a whole other thing is them being honest about that. But when you're working with another wholesaler and they're trying to help you sell one of our deals, what's a good way for a wholesaler to go about working with another wholesaler to be able to help them sell a property?
Yeah, a couple different things. So the main thing, it just really comes down to knowing that person and trusting them. So I kind of fell into that trap because I'm just a nice guy. I trust a lot of people. And if someone says, hey, I have a buyer, I believe them. And I learned quick that that's not the case. So if you get approached by another wholesaler who wants to move your deal, you want to first ask them like, hey, I can only work with you if you actually have a buyer that wants this property, and it's even better if they've already seen the property. That could get a little tough because they have to go through you to see it somehow. Typically, that's how the wholesaler goes through you to do it. But you want to make sure, like, hey, if we do this deal, you're not just going to put this under contract with me and then blast it out and shop it around. That's not helping anyone. That would be daisy chaining, and that's not what you want to do. So it's just having that conversation and being clear, like, hey, I'm going to bring you my buyer. They're ready to go. I'm not shopping this around. And you want you kind of just want that out there and clear for everyone. The second thing that I've seen personally, which it's a great idea, is I've been approached by a wholesaler in our market that we got it on paper. Like I basically gave them the right to take our property to their buyer, not to market it, but say, hey, you can take our property and talk to your buyer about it and sell it at the same price we have, kind of like it's your own deal. And that way that they're kind of that agreement's on paper. that they can't market it out, they can't blast it out, they can't put it on Facebook. They're taking it directly to their buyer, and we've got kind of like you can call it a first right, but we can also market it and sell to anyone we want within that period that we agree to, where they can market it to their buyers. So it's just really, again, coming down to the trust and making sure that everyone's clear on both ends that, hey, this is our deal. Don't go mark it up to something ridiculous. Bring me a buyer and we can pay you a referral fee, or put under contract with us and assign it to your buyer for whatever you want.
I think the big thing with this, Randy, is, you mentioned about having trust with the people that you're working with, but it really comes down to knowing your buyers list, of knowing exactly what your buyers want. So, if Randy has a property or somebody else has a property, it's exactly what your buyer wants, of like, just understand their criteria and like, hey, all right, this is a perfect connection. I think this will work, and then going from there. So I think that's a big thing with having it. It's versus just, having a bunch of buyers on your buyers list and email blasting out, of making sure you're checking in with them, know their criteria, know exactly what they want, to kind of work it that way. So Ronnie, from your end, when you're buying a lot of properties from other wholesalers, and you're kind of helping them out, or we might do JV deals or partner deals and stuff like that. We can talk about that, and we talk about that all the time on kind of what we do and things like that. I want you to kind of focus on, because I see all the time when people say like, oh, I got a deal in this, and I see a lot of people say, oh, let's JV, I got buyers, blah blah blah. What are some things you want to talk to those people about, or say to those people what things to be weary of or be careful of when you have somebody trying to JV with you or partner with you or try to wholesale with some of your deals or anything like that? So what's some advice you have for that?
Ask deeper questions about like who they are, what they're going, like what's going on, how many deals have they done. You really want to kind of get a background on like what have you done in the city, like how many transactions have you done, how many deals have you done, because I mean there are some really tricky people and shady people out there too. And then even I don't know, kind of test them a little bit. See, what have you done in this area? How familiar are you with this zip code? Again, ask them, what have they done? Because a lot of times I'm noticing wholesalers just literally just trying to get something. They're just finding anything, and then just blasting it out. I mean, we're looking at all in different type of groups and people trying to figure out, well, who really has this deal? Like, and it's so confusing, and it just causes a lot of, distrust, so when you see different deals coming in, I mean, so really, just vet people. It's okay to vet people. It's your deal. Vet people. Really kind of run them through the ringers and figure out, is this somebody that you really want to work with as well? Spend time with them, have a Zoom meeting with them, just to kind of figure out their character, to see if things match up for you, if it makes sense. That's what I would really just implore you to do. I talk with a lot of different wholesalers and stuff. Some are pleasant to work with, others not so much. And I'm just kind of figuring out the ones that, are a little bit more pleasant to work with. Sometimes they have a little bit better deals, and that's okay. As well. So that's my advice, just to really screen them.
Yeah, that's great. Of just the asking questions part. I think one of the things that frustrates me the most of happening to kind of the newer wholesalers, or ones that are maybe less experienced, are the ones that have a pretty good property that can be wholesaled, and then they enter into a JV agreement with somebody that promises big things. Then that person that they JV with does nothing at all to help them sell the property. They end up selling the property, but have to split the profits because they thought this person was going to help them out. So be careful of that, and just really watch out for that stuff, because it happens every day here in Indianapolis and around the nation. So be careful there. All right, guys, I got one more, and then we'll get out of here and stuff. So I want to talk about the last kind of one I kind of picked to kind of talk about, is one that has an escrow agreement in place. So basically being able to wholesale property, and we can kind of talk about what happens here. So a lot of times we might get a property under contract that maybe the owner, or maybe the seller needs time to get out of the property after they sell the property. So basically we can close on the property, or we can sell the property, get it under contract, but then maybe the owner needs to have another 2 weeks to get their stuff together to organize a move, or maybe they need a month because they're going to move into another place and just need more time. So during that time, basically what we do is we put an escrow agreement in place to where we get under contract, agree to a closing date, but then maybe they have 2 weeks or a month that they need to move out, but we hold back $3,000, $5,000, 10% of whatever you're selling the property for in escrow with the title company. So then once they do vacate, then basically the person will get their money back. They have to vacate. They have to do everything they said within the escrow agreement to be able to get that money. So in this case, this was one that we did out on Windsor Park on 12th Street, where we got this property under contract for $26,000. This was a great deal, a really solid deal, really excited about it. We had an escrow agreement in place for basically they could stand there for a month. And we ended up selling this property for $61,000 with the escrow agreement in place. And we ended up making a $35,000 profit on here. But the trick to that is that we had to make sure everything happened within the escrow agreement to kind of go along with that and help out any way we could to make sure all those things happened, to make sure everybody got their money, everybody got out in time, and everybody got that done. So when you're dealing with that, let's kind of start with that first part of that. And Brett, let me call on you for this. Of when you're part of being a wholesaler, we know is being a problem solver. So a lot of times you have to figure out different scenarios. Every seller needs something different. Every seller's in a different scenario. So sometimes you need to problem solve and figure out situations like, hey, let's put an escrow agreement in place to help you out where we can close on the property or get the property under contract. It can close and then you can move out 2 weeks later, a month later, whatever it may be. So let's talk a little bit about that, of just kind of being that problem solver and kind of figuring out how those little aspects of just what sellers need and being able to put those things in place like escrow agreements to help them out.
Yeah, definitely. So as wholesalers, like you said, Brian, we are problem solvers. So number one, this has been a learning curve for us. We didn't always used to do this. So we would actually we would get a property and the seller would need time to move out after the closing because they need the money. They need that money in their hands in order to get all their stuff and to move out of the property, right? So we were trying to be nice about it, and we were like, okay, that's fine. Let's just go ahead and close it, and then you can move in 2 weeks. Great, let's just do it. And then what happened was they didn't have any motivation to get out of the property. So that 2 weeks turned into 3 weeks and they weren't out, turned into 4 weeks and they weren't out. And that turned into when they finally did move out, the place was trashed. So we had to send people in there to clean the whole house, and it was just a nightmare. So we problem solved and we were like, okay, how can we still do these types of deals? And that's where we came up with this escrow agreement. And we were like, okay, we'll give you 2 weeks to move after the closing, but we're going to hold back $5,000 in an escrow agreement. And when you do move and you do clean up the house and clean all your stuff out, we'll walk it and then we'll give you that money back. And a lot of them, they're fine with that. There's not much pushback because, again, they get to close the house, they get to stay in the house. And then their intentions are to move, right? Anyways, so they'll know they'll get their money back eventually anyways. But the thing about it is money brings a lot of motivation. And in our escrow agreement, the clause says, if you don't move out, what happens? And a lot of times we charge $250 per day, right? So that's a lot of motivation for a seller to get out of the property. So it's been a great problem-solving solution for us, and it's also, if you're assigning the contract, it's an easy sell to the buyer if you have that escrow agreement in place, right? If you don't have anything in place, that's a hard sell. I'm like, oh, by the way, the seller's not going to move for 3 weeks, and that's it. But if you say the seller's not going to move for 3 weeks, but we got $5,000, and if they don't move, you get that money, then that's an easier sell for their buyer as well.
Yeah. Which can usually, it's going to, a lot of times you want to make sure it's going to be able to cover an eviction if you have to do that or anything in those lines. Make sure your agreement is enough. Brett, we typically, I like to say if anything that's kind of over $70,000, I kind of do like a 10% thing kind of on the, on the lower end stuff. We usually do like $500 for every week that they need, or, that's kind of the general stuff. Do you have anything to add to that of kind of what people should charge or hold back in escrow?
Typically, yeah, I would try to go around that 10% rule and start there. And if there's any pushback on that, we do probably have a minimum. So like if you're buying a property for $10,000, I wouldn't hold back $1,000. Our minimum typically is around $3,000 that we do hold back. So usually a minimum of $3,000 and then kind of use 10% of whatever the sale price is what I would start with. If there's pushback, then you can always negotiate from there.
Yeah. And there's always little things too you can put in the escrow agreement, such as like, hey, the property will be completely cleaned out of all your stuff, or it'll be broom swept. We've done all those kind of things. And if it's, for every day that you're not out, it's $500 that we get to keep, or, there's kind of some of those things that you can put in there as well. Definitely when it comes to that type of thing, that's where I'd reach out to, your lawyer, your title company, get some input on any of that stuff. So, But fellas, we are right at an hour, so I'm going to have to shut it off about right there. If anybody has any questions, any comments, anything that we did not cover that you'd like to have answers to, feel free to reach out to us, whether it's on social media on this post, or reach out to me at brian@simplewholesaling.com. I'd be more than happy to help you out or get connected with people that can answer your questions if I can't. But very happy to help you. Very happy to help you. There are more situations than what we just covered. We just picked 8 that kind of different scenarios and things too. We did not really get into commercial or anything like that. We have a laundromat right now that we're selling, so maybe we'll give an update on that on a later one or something. But yeah, a lot of different scenarios, a lot of different things that you can do. If anything, I've always just learned that anything is possible, anything's on the table. Anything is basically everything is negotiable. So just keep that in mind. If you have a situation that sounds good, it could possibly be wholesaled, more than likely you can make it happen. If you need some help with it, definitely reach out to us. We'd be more than happy to help you out. So for myself and all the guys here on Simple, thanks a lot. Thanks for tuning in, and we will see you guys in August for our next meetup. It will stay virtual for the rest of this year, which I think is okay. And just let us know if you want us to cover anything that we haven't covered yet. Later, guys.
Hey, guys.